Tarkov used to be great. The game may have never been perfect, but it was like that game when you sunk your teeth into it, it was hard to let go, even with all the shortcomings that it presented. For those gamers that really enjoy first person shooter games, Tarkov was a cut above the rest and dove into a side of FPS games that was rarely explored by other games. For those unaware, Escape from Tarkov is a first person shooter title by the Russian Battlestate Games. It's a gritty, realistic, and very intense game that has one of the steepest learning curves known in the industry. The graphical fidelity was on a different level. Maps felt full and with plenty of places to go to loot, or to fight in, or to hide in. Textures rarely felt repeated, and each map had its own personality. If you grew up in Eastern Europe, many of the maps may have felt eerily familiar. Apart from how the game looked, the game also felt realistic, as when you got shot or fell from a high place, that part of your body got a wound. And when you needed to upgrade your gun, you had to manually swap out all the parts of the gun for the ones that you wanted to add. You couldn't run forever because you would need to eat or stay hydrated. Every detail of physical health and gun combat was analyzed greatly and implemented in such a way that made it feel like you were actually on the front lines of combat. Recoil of guns were nearly identical to those in real life. Your gun could jam or misfire in the middle of a fight. Even if you fired your gun too much, they would overheat. The way that Tarkov separated itself from other games like Warzone or Siege is with that realistic element and how you got immersed, where your character and their environment were reflections of you and your environment. When I first loaded into Tarkov, I was struck with awe. I had wanted to play a game where the garbage and graffiti felt real, where the tiles were broken off at random places or full in others, where the rust off the railing looked unique on every surface. Tarkov was like Forza for shooter games, and the amount of detail that the developers captured was unreal. There was just one small problem with this incredible amount of detail. You'd get low frames. When you played Tarkov, even on low settings with good hardware, you could still expect to play sub 100 FPS. Even if hardware wasn't an issue for you, running a Threadripper with 128 gigs of RAM with two 3090s and SLI, it's questionable if you'd be able to maintain anything over 144 Hz. Tarkov was a GPU heavy game and would eat up all the RAM you could give it. But when you were able to hit that sweet spot of stable frames for your hardware, the game felt magical. Oh, I forgot to mention, but Tarkov plays in wipes. Each major update was released at certain intervals throughout the year, which most often happen at the beginning of the year and then in the middle of the year. This is done to make sure that players get new content and the big patches can be expected at those certain times because they often changed what the gameplay was like. If you play Tarkov for any amount of wipes that is more than one, you will realize how nice they can be. To those that feel like a wipe that clears all your progress and forces you to start fresh is pointless, let me tell you why it's not. As with every game, a majority of the population will play quote unquote casually, or they will play enough that they know the mechanics and the maps of the game, but won't sink too much time or money into the game. They just aren't that emotionally or financially invested into the game. Then you get a smaller portion of the population that does sink a little bit of money and a couple hundred hours in the game because they genuinely enjoy it and want to be good at the game. They sweat a little. Then finally, you get the small minority of people who somehow have nothing better to do with themselves other than to sink thousands of dollars and hours into the game for no other reason than because they can. Luckily for Tarkov, the most amount of money you could spend was when picking out your game bundle, but the only restriction left was how many hours a person could physically muster. For that small minority of people who sunk or still continue to sink hundreds and thousands of hours into Tarkov, they have a fair but also unfair advantage over the others they play with. The sheer amount of time they spend in the game eventually gets them better loot, better weapons, better armor, better meds, and more money that they can use to buy those same items over again. The reason why a wipe is refreshing is because it levels the playing field, even if only briefly, between the people just trying the game for the first time and the people who know where every atom in the game is. It also doesn't allow for people to hoard their goods forever and have that wealth gap stay forever open. Not to mention, once you have completed all your challenges and quests, the game becomes stagnant as the incentives to keep playing the game dwindle. Going back on something I just mentioned about sweaty players having an advantage, another good reason for those fields to be leveled is because there is no ranked system in Tarkov. Lobbies are indiscriminate as to who you play with. To those that feel not having an MMR system or having some sort of ranking system is stupid, we actually have to go way back to the game feeling realistic. In real life, combat would not put you up against those with the same skill as you. You will be put up against those with varying degrees of skill. Part of learning how to play Tarkov is being able to play with those people that are better than you at the game and mitigate those risks. At first, it really does suck. You don't even know how to play the game yet, and a level 41 PMC already head-eyes you. But when you do play with those types of players, you learn how to counterattack, or you learn how to avoid those big players, or you learn how to play silently, and that all comes with practice and time. Everyone has had that start where they hate the game because you don't know anything but are expected to know all of it. For me, when I first played Tarkov, after I admired all the graphics for however many minutes, I was already turned off by the difficulty of the game. I avoided Tarkov for probably a couple months until one day I was like, I spent $50 on this game. I might as well try it again. And after I gave it that second chance, I did not want to stop playing and I was addicted. The rankless lobbies allowed me to learn not only how to play with friends who were higher level, but also against higher level players, and the learning curve started getting more gradual. It also helped me develop my play style and it helped me become the Tarkov player I am today. Up until now, this doesn't sound like a game that could have too many issues and too many turnoffs to warrant a title like Tarkov used to be great. We'll get into why that is the case now. For a while, Tarkov seemed like a game that could only go up. I had very few complaints, and I was adjusting to the pacing of the game. Hour-long raids felt like 20 minutes had only gone by. I met some really solid friends through the Tarkov Discord. Even my friends enjoyed playing the game with me every so often. But that all came crashing down at the start of 2022. Inertia was introduced. For a game that prides itself on being realistic, Inertia seems like the logical choice to make. You can't exactly forget about physics existing in real life. However, the issue I took with Inertia is that I learned how to play the game without it in the actual game. Why don't you just learn how to play the game with Inertia, one might ask. And for me, as I hope with many other Tarkov players, it ruined the pacing of the game. For maps that are huge like Woods or Interchange, or the near hour-long length of some raids, when you feel like you're constantly being slowed down by some force, it all of a sudden becomes uncomfortable to move between points and extracts. Not to mention, in the game, the clock was running at an accelerated speed, so when it was noon when you entered the raid and the sun was setting when you were leaving the raid, how does that work with reduced character speed? Inertia in Tarkov feels like your character is moving in slow motion when your environment is moving faster than you. When the news first broke out that Inertia was being introduced, it was hailed as one of those things that would fix Tarkov, but in my opinion, it was only the beginning of its downfall. More seasoned players that played since 2017 or 2018, they might say that the downfall started in 2019 or 2020 when BSG had plans in its roadmap that they had either not gotten to releasing yet, or they had massive delays in the release. One of the big criticisms that longtime players have of Tarkov is the scheduling and release dates of new maps, guns, or patches. The biggest offender of these delays is the map Streets of Tarkov. I found a record of the new map Streets of Tarkov being scheduled for release in 2020. However, it is not until the writing of this video that it was released in 2022, or 3 years after this post was made. Since that post, only one other map has been added, in Lighthouse, to lukewarm reception at best at the end of 2020. I understand that with the immense level of detail each map gets, it is not easy to pump them out like they're nobody's business. But waiting 3 years for a map that was supposed to be released 2 years ago is ridiculous. This kind of treatment, where you keep your very, very loyal followers waiting and waiting and waiting for new content, is not the kind of image you want to be putting out there, and it is why I think that Tarkov may have started rolling downhill before I even started playing. I understand that 2020 was a weird year and that things were different, but it is hard for me to imagine that the map was stuck in development for so long and that a completely different map was able to release before it in the same time. Another thing many Tarkov players were wondering about is when there would be a new trader released. With the most recent wipe, the Lightkeeper was introduced. On the surface, it's good to have another trader you can interact with, to buy or sell items with. The downside is that in order to interact with him, he is no longer in the trader's menu that most people are accustomed to, but rather you have to meet him in raid. I myself don't know what he brings to the table that isn't already available with traders like Mechanic or Skier, so I can't exactly say if Lightkeeper fills a gap or a niche that hasn't already been covered. However, what I can say is just from the idea of a trader being found only in raid sounds like a dangerous idea for any and all players wishing to interact with him. There will be players that will camp him, there will be scavs that will find you, there will be some level of danger when trying to meet with him. Not to mention, when all other traders sit comfortably in your traders tab, you can easily check if the items you want are in stock or not. If you go to the Lightkeeper, only to find out he doesn't have what you need or his items are out of stock because his inventory follows the same rules as the other traders, all that does is create an unnecessarily high risk situation for you going out there in a raid to find out. Remember when I mentioned at the very beginning of the video about Tarkov's amazing graphics at the cost of FPS? Well, with the newest wipe, graphics have tanked and no memory leak issues have been patched, with new leaks being introduced. This means when you play the game, there is a chance that the game's code doesn't properly allocate data into memory and it fills it up instead, leading to piss poor FPS. Even if you're running a system with 32, 64, or even more gigabytes of RAM, the amount of memory you have is pointless because the bottleneck in playing the game is the game itself. When I attempted to run the game in the past week, my beefy system struggled to stay above 60 FPS, even when graphics were switched from ultra to low. Even with DLSS on, my FPS remained the same. It is sad for me to write this script because I was really hoping for Tarkov to become a great game. It reminds me of one of the first lines Tony Soprano delivers in The Sopranos. It's good being in something from the ground floor. I came too late for that. I came in at the end. The best is over. I got to enjoy Tarkov for the wipe or two that I did, where I learned how to play the game and its mechanics. I learned my favorite maps down to the very last detail. I learned how to play my style well, and I learned how to enjoy myself doing so. It is only after the dreadful end-of-year wipe in 2021 that my love and admiration for the game faded away. Every time since that I played the game, nothing has felt the same. That charm doesn't win me over anymore. After not playing the game for a while, inertia is not as bad, but it still annoys me and irritates me. As much as I would love to play the game is too broken and too buggy for me to enjoy. I still have talked with some friends and discussed what kind of changes I would implement, or we would implement, to make the game better, so if anyone from BSG is listening, please take some of these suggestions into consideration. This will also cover some smaller issues I didn't mention earlier, because they were not as severe and didn't make the game unplayable, but it did affect some aspects of gameplay from time to time. First, please get rid of inertia. I have sparsely played the game at all in 2022, and it wasn't for the fact I wasn't able to adjust playing with inertia, but it did ruin the pacing of raids. Like I mentioned earlier, it makes hour-long raids feel sluggish and personally ruins the immersion. Second, instead of banning certain leveled items completely from the fleet and introducing a trader that can only be found in-game, how about you do something similar to Fence? How about you're able to level up this trader, and every time you level them up, you can unlock those higher leveled items to be bought and sold on the fleet. Restricting what can be bought and sold is not a great way to keep the in-game economy afloat for all the players. It's already hard enough to make money in the game. Let those players with the high rep and high level be able to sell those lucrative items. Third, fix the memory leak issues. I remember dealing with one memory leak issue before back in 2021, but that was a rare occurrence when me or any of my friends played. Now when any of us log in, we cannot get stable frames in-game, although nothing about our hardware or settings has changed. If you want people to play your game, make sure your game is actually playable. Fourth, Please make scavs and bosses easier to deal with. I am not saying to make bosses weak like plush animal stuffies, but if you're trying to make the game realistic, make it consistent. Killa should not be able to run, hide behind cover, not see me, and still mow me down like my dad and the grass on a weekend. Tagilla should also not be blazing fast when you yourself can't run that fast, and while he's holding an anime-sized hammer too. Additionally with Tagilla, since he isn't wearing much armor other than his helmet and a vest, maybe make him easier to kill when you're shooting at his torso? Sanitar is too beefy on Shoreline, because he can sniff you from a mile away and his aim will basically be perfect, even if you have really good cover. Scavs have the issue that their aim has either been turned up or turned up because of a bug, and that their aim and awareness is that of a boss. If they're supposed to be the street grunts, they should not act or behave in the same manner that the bosses do. With that said, bosses and scavs alike have had their spidey senses go through the roof, and that needs to be severely toned down. Make the fights fair. If you have to, get Pestilli to play as the bosses and an AI to learn from him, so at least there's a verifiable human element to the bosses and not some crazy aimbot that knows where you are at all times. Fifth, please stay consistent with your roadmaps and the releases of new maps, guns, and whatever else you'll add. Nothing is a bigger slap in the face to the people that truly love your game other than giving them false hope, and that the things that they are truly excited for get pushed back further and further with mediocre content serving as filler. No one wants something that was as unpolished as Black Ops 3 for the PS3 and Xbox 360, but no one wants to wait for something that is still in development way past its original due date. You will get people that are pushed away from your game because you break your promises or at least don't provide adequate commentary as to why they're being delayed. I probably won't be playing Tarkov as much as I used to. To me, Tarkov now serves as a fad that I really got into and has dwindled away to an icon that just sits on my desktop and is rarely touched. Unless some major bug fixes happen that make the game playable again, or the pacing in the raids is fixed, or you actually stand a chance when facing against scavs and bosses, I probably won't touch Tarkov all that much. The main reason I still enjoy playing CSGO even 5 years later after I started playing is because it is consistent. Yes, that game has its own issues with hackers and bad matchmaking, but the rhythm of CSGO and the gameplay hasn't changed much in those 5 years. If Tarkov was able to fix what is wrong with itself, maybe I'll come back to play again. But until that day, I will only play Tarkov very occasionally. To end the video off on something positive, I want to show you my proudest moment in Tarkov. My first and only time that I ever killed Killa was not with bullets, but with the shrapnel from my grenade. Sunday, November 28th, 2021.